So now we return to begin our next part of this part 4. This is when Jim Hawkins returns to be the narrator. So it says narrative resumed by Jim Hawkins, Garrison and the Stockade. And this is chapter 19. All right. First of all, let's talk about the title. What's a garrison? A garrison is a place where, like, an army would defend a very important position. So kind of like, well, what a stockade is for, right? It's where you're armed and you're set up to defend yourself. That's what they're doing right now. And there's only those few people in the stockade and quite a few more on the pirate side. Okay, so here we go. As soon as Ben Gunn saw the colors, he came to a halt, stopped me by the arm, and sat down. Okay, now we've backed up a little bit. You heard Jim yelling as he was approaching the stockade. Now this is just a few minutes before that, when he still has Ben Gunn with him. Now, said he, there's your friends, sure enough. Far more likely it's the mutineers, I answered. That, he cried, why, in a place like this where nobody puts but gentlemen of fortune, Silver would fly the Jolly Roger. You don't make no doubt of that. Now that's your friends. There's been blows too, and I reckon your friends has had the best of it. And here they are ashore in the old stockade, as was made years and years ago by Flint. Ah, he was the man to have a headpiece, was Flint. Barring rum, his match were never seen. He were afraid of none, not he, only Silver. Silver was that genteel. Okay, there's a lot to make of that. Remember, Ben Gunn, partly crazy, and also he speaks with a lot of pirate lingo. But what you're going to get out of this is that Jim and Ben have seen the British colors. The Union Jack flag is flying over the stockade. And Ben's like, oh, no, that's not the pirates. That is definitely your friends. And they're in the stockade. And he says, the stockade that Captain Flint built. Because Captain Flint, he says, if it wasn't for rum, barring rum, he had a headpiece. He was a smart guy. He liked to have a good strong place to defend himself. So the only person that Flint was ever afraid of was Long John Silver. And I think that's just to continue to build up that character of Long John Silver, that we should all know that Billy Bones was afraid of him. He was the most terrifying thing to Billy Bones. And even Captain Flint, the one everybody else was afraid of, was a bit afraid of Long John Silver. So keep that in mind. Well, said I, that may be so, and so be it. All the more reason that I should hurry on and join my friends. Nay, mate, returned Ben, not you. You're a good boy, or I'm mistook. But you're only a boy, all told. Now Ben Gunn is fly. Rum wouldn't bring me there where you're going, not rum wouldn't, till I see you're born gentleman and gets it on his word of honor. And you won't forget my words. A precious sight, that's what you'll say. A precious sight more confidence. And then nips him. And whenever he says nips him, he's like a pinchy guy. He's like, oh, you get what I'm saying? Get what I'm saying? And pinches people for effect. It's a very strange attitude and makes him seem even more crazy. But he's saying to Jim, I'm not going to go down there. You can give me rum and pay me to go down there. I need to have their word of honor before I do. Now, remember, he is a former pirate, a marooned former pirate. These guys might just want to imprison him and get him put on trial and hung for being a pirate. So he's got trust issues. He's holding back, okay? And he pinched me the third time with the same air of cleverness. Pinchy guy. And when Ben Gunn is wanted, you know where to find him, Jim. Just where you found him today. And him that comes is to have a white thing in his hand. And he's to come alone. Oh, and you'll say this. Ben Gunn, says you, has reasons of his own. Well, said I believe I understand. You have something to propose. And you wish to see the squire or the doctor, and you're to be found where I found you. Is that all? And when, says you? He added. Why, from about noon observation to about 6 bells. Good, said I, and now may I go? You won't forget? He inquired anxiously. Precious sight and reasons of his own, says you. Reasons of his own. That's the mainstay as between man and man. Well then, still holding me, I reckon you can go, Jim. And Jim, if you was to see Silver, you wouldn't go for to sell Ben Gunn. Wild horses wouldn't draw it from you, no, no, says you. And if them pirates camp ashore, Jim, what would you say but there'd be widders in the morning? Now let me go through this a little bit. So he's like, make sure that you tell them I've got reasons of my own. So he's like, I can't go talk to you now, but I have reasons of my own. Tell them I have reasons of my own. Okay, crazy man. And then he's like, oh, if you see Long John Silver, you're not going to tell him about me, right? You're not going to tell him about me. Okay. And also, what would you say if, this is the last thing he says, what if you say if the pirates camp on the shore, that there might be widders in the morning? And that's his pronunciation for widows. A widow is a woman whose husband has died. What does Ben mean by that? I want to underline that. We might have to come back to it later. Here he was interrupted by a loud report, and a cannonball came tearing through the trees and pitched in the sand not 100 yards from where we two were talking. The next moment, each of us had taken to his heels in a different direction. For a good hour to come, frequent reports shook the island, and balls kept crashing through the woods. I moved from hiding place to hiding place, always pursued, or so it seemed to me, by these terrifying missiles. But towards the end of the bombardment, though still I durst not venture in the direction of the stockade, where the balls fell oftenest, I had begun in a manner to pluck up my heart again, and after a long detour to the east, crept down among the shoreside trees. So Jim didn't go running straight for the stockade where that flag was, even though Ben was like, no, that's where your friends are. He was scared of it because he didn't really know what was going on. And also that's where most of the cannonballs were falling. So he instead makes his way around and down to the shore. The sun had just set. The sea breeze was rustling and tumbling in the woods and ruffling the gray surface of the anchorage. The tide, too, was far out, and great tracts of sand lay uncovered. The air, after the heat of the day, chilled me through my jacket. The Hispaniola still lay where she had anchored, but sure enough, there was the Jolly Roger, the black flag of piracy, flying from her peak. Even as I looked, there came another red flash and another report that sent the echoes clattering, and one more round shot whistled through the air. It was the last of the cannonade. So he gets down there just to see the last cannon shot get shot because they ran out of ammunition. And he finds out, sees for himself, that Hispaniola is no longer under control by the captain and the squire and their men. It is now controlled by the pirates. I lay for some time watching the bustle which succeeded the attack. Men were demolishing something with axes on the beach near the stockade. The poor jolly boat, I afterwards discovered. Away near the mouth of the river, a great fire was glowing among the trees, and between that point and the ship, one of the gigs kept coming and going, and men, whom I had seen so gloomy, shouting at the oars like children. But there was a sound in their voices which suggested rum. Okay, so he's seeing some things. There's activity at the boat. There's one of the bigger rowboats, the gigs, is going back and forth between the ship and the shoreline, where there are a lot of the other pirates. And he can hear them shouting back and forth at each other, and it sounds like maybe they've been drinking. Okay. At length, I thought I might return towards the stockade. I was pretty far down on the low sandy spit that encloses the anchorage to the east and is joined at half water to Skeleton Island. That's the little island, okay? And now, as I rose to my feet, I saw some distance further down the spit and rising from among low bushes an isolated rock, pretty high and peculiarly white in color. It occurred to me that this might be the White Rock of which Ben Gunn had spoken, and that some day or other a boat might be wanted, and I should know where to look for one. Remember, a few chapters back, Ben Gunn had told Jim that that would be the way that he could get him to the Hispaniola, is that he has a boat and it's hidden under a white rock. So Jim, while he's there at the shore, sees this white rock, and in his mind he's like, might need a boat someday. Gonna remember that rock. Okay. Then I skirted among the woods until I had regained the rear or shoreward side of the stockade, and was soon warmly welcomed by the faithful party. So after going down to the shore and seeing all that with the pirates, seeing the boat location perhaps, he turns around and makes his way back to the stockade. I had soon told my story and began to look about me. The log house was made of unsquared trunks of pine, roof, walls, and floor. The latter stood in several places as much as a foot or foot and a half above the surface of the sand. There was a porch at the door, and under this porch the little spring welled up into an artificial basin of rather odd kind, no other than a great ship's kettle of iron, and the bottom knocked out and sunk to her bearings, as the captain said, among the sand. Little had been left besides the framework of the house, but in one corner there was a stone slab laid down by way of hearth, and an old rusty iron basket to contain the fire. The slopes of the knoll and all the inside of the stockade had been cleared of timber to build the house, and we could see by the stumps what a fine and lofty growth had been destroyed. Most of the soil had been washed away or buried in drift after the removal of the trees. Only where the streamlet ran down from the kettle, a thick bed of moss and some ferns and little creeping bushes were still green among the sand. Very close around the stockade, too close for defense, they said, the wood still flourished high and dense, all of fir on the land side, but towards the sea with a large admixture of live oaks. Okay, time to bring up our picture for a second because we have a few things to kind of talk about in it. So he talks about how there are, so here's the log house, and it's going to have a doorway, and right there, there's a basin that was a kettle from the ship, and that's where the spring flows into, so they can basically dip out water, because just imagine like a stream coming up out of the ground, and they took a kettle, cut the bottom out of it, and shoved it down in there so that it basically would hold a little bit of water before spilling out, and then it comes down here. There are lots of stumps growing all around this hill. It used to be a big grove of trees, so there's lots of stumps. And then it's kind of sandy and bare for the most part because there's no vegetation really to hold things together on the hill. And the only place where there is really vegetation is that there's some moss and ferns around this this stream that goes down the hill. And I drew mine a little bit squiggly like that. Okay, and remember this is a wood palisade, so just some logs around the bottom. So you've got the cabin there. We'll probably get a little bit more into what's that cabin, or not cabin, let's call it the log house or the block house. Okay, all right, I'm gonna get my text to come back up here. And remember, I'm reading the entire text of Treasure Island. There we go, on my phone. It's available anywhere you go. Okay. The cold evening breeze, of which I have spoken, whistled through every chink of the rude building and sprinkled the floor with a continual rain of fine sand. There was sand in our eyes, sand in our teeth, and sand in our suppers, sand dancing in the spring at the bottom of the kettle, for all the world like porridge beginning to boil. Our chimney was a square hole in the roof. It was but a little part of the smoke that found its way out, and the rest eddied about the house and kept us coughing and piping in the eye. Kind of a miserable spot, right? It was sandy and smoky. Okay. Add to this that Gray, the new man, had his face tied up in a bandage for a cut he had got in breaking away from the mutineers, and that poor old Tom Redruth, still unburied, lay along the wall, stiff and stark, under the Union Jack, okay, the flag that the captain put on him. If we had been allowed to sit idle, we should all have fallen in the blues. But Captain Smollett was never the man for that. All hands were called up before him, and he divided us into watches. The doctor and Gray and I, for one, the squire, Hunter, and Joyce upon the other. Tired though we all were, 2 were sent out for firewood, 2 more were set to dig a grave for Redruth. The doctor was named Cook, and I was put sentry at the door, and the captain himself went from one to another, keeping up our spirits and lending a hand wherever it was wanted. From time to time, the doctor came to the door for a little air, and to rest his eyes, which were almost smoked out of his head, and whenever he did so, he had a word for me. "That man Smollett," he said once, "is a better man than I am. And when I say that, it means a deal, Jim." Another time he came and was silent for a while. Then he put his head on one side and looked at me. "Is this Ben Gunn a man?" he asked. "I do not know, sir," said I. "I'm not very sure whether he's sane." If there's any doubt about the matter, he is, returned the doctor. A man who has been 3 years biting his nails on a desert island, Jim, can't expect to appear as sane as you or me. It doesn't lie in human nature. Was it cheese you said he had a fancy for? Yes, sir, cheese, I answered. Well, Jim, says he, just see that the good that comes from being dainty in your food. You've seen my snuff box, haven't you? And you never saw me take snuff. The reason being that in my snuff box I carry a piece of Parmesan cheese, a cheese made in Italy, very nutritious. Well, that's for Ben Gunn. Okay, to sum up that conversation, first the doctor makes a point of telling Jim that he thinks that the captain is a really good man, a better man than I, is what he says. He really admires the captain, and probably from what he's seen of him so far in the bit of crisis they've had, like in the escape from the cannon in the boat and all of that, and how he's handled the situation at the stockade. And then he asks about Ben Gunn, asks if he's a man. Is he worthwhile? And Jim's like, I don't know. I think he might be crazy. And either you know a guy's crazy or they're probably not so crazy. That it's just a really hard thing to do, to be alone on an island for so long. And cheese, he wants cheese. So this is interesting, actually. The doctor mentions a snuff box. One of the ways that tobacco was consumed, and I guess still can be consumed, but back in the day, in this time, in the 1700s, that a powdered tobacco substance was consumed by snorting it into your nose. Not recommended, not a good idea. But it was a stimulant, and people liked those kind of things, like a wake me up kind of thing, I guess. I don't know. Sounds like a bad idea. Probably caused cancer of the nose. Anyway, they'd have these decorative little boxes that they would put it in. Okay, so the doctor's saying, you've seen I have a snuff box, but you've never seen me use snuff, have you? I don't, because that's where I keep my Parmesan cheese. And he talks about how that's what you get for being dainty with your food. Turns out I actually have cheese on me, which is probably going to come in handy because Ben Gunn wants cheese. All right, keep that note for later because that might be important. Before supper was eaten, we buried old Tom in the sand and stood round him for a while bareheaded in the breeze. A good deal of firewood had been got in, but not enough for the captain's fancy, and he shook his head over and told us we must get back to this tomorrow rather livelier. Then, when we had eaten our pork and each had a good stiff glass of brandy grog, the three chiefs got together in a corner to discuss our prospects. It appears they were at their wits' end what to do, the stores being so low that we must have been starved into surrender long before help came. But our best hope, it was decided, was to kill off the buccaneers until they either hauled down their flag or ran away with the Hispaniola. From 19, they were already reduced to 15. 2 others were wounded, and one, at least, the man shot beside the gun, severely wounded, if he were not dead. Every time we had a crack at them, we were to take it, saving our own lives with the extremest care. And besides that, we had 2 able allies, rum and the climate. And what they mean by that is rum and the climate being allies is that in the fight against the pirates, they've got themselves and their weapons. But they also have rum because the pirates like to drink and it's not good for them and it doesn't make them better fighters. And also the climate of the island. Remember, the doctors told us from the very beginning that this place, especially down by the shore where the pirates are, is bad for your health. And so that's another ally they have against the pirates. As for the first, though we were about half a mile away, we could hear them roaring and singing into the late night. So that's the rum causing that, right? And as for the second, the doctor staked his wig that, camped where they were in the marsh and unprovided with remedies, the half of them would be on their backs before a week. So they're all going to be sick, is what he's saying. So, he added, if we are not all shot down first, they'll be glad to be packing in the schooner. It's always a ship, and they can get to buccaneering again, I suppose. First ship that ever I lost, said Captain Smollett. I was dead tired, as you may fancy, and when I got to sleep, which was not till after a great deal of tossing, I slept like a log of wood. The rest had long been up, and had already breakfasted and increased the pile of firewood by about half as much again when I was awakened by a bustle and the sound of voices. Flag of truce, I heard someone say, and then, immediately after, with a cry of surprise, Silver himself! And at that, up I jumped and, rubbing my eyes, ran to a loophole in the wall. All right. So that is the end of chapter 19. It filled in the blanks. It got us caught up a little bit about what's going on at the stockade and what their concerns are. Okay. And gives us a little bit more background information. But it ends with kind of a cliffhanger because here comes Long John Silver himself with a flag of truce. Okay. So I guess we'll find out what that means in our next chapter. Make sure that your notes are good. Make sure that you summarize what was important in this chapter. Make sure you get some of those little details that might be important later. Like, why would Dr. Livesey have cheese? Why would the author tell us about that if that wasn't important? Things like that. It's like clues of a mystery. Write down the things like that might be a good wonder, okay? Write down little things. Use those things that ask you, like, what did you like the most, or what do you wonder about, or what did you find to be more difficult, the most difficult? Look through, and whatever you can write in those spaces, those are ways that you can remember more about the story. And when it all comes down to it, at the end of the book, when you do an assessment, it might be really handy to have notes that you could look at that would be helpful to you. Okay, so mark your text. Keep it handy. All right. And we will move on to chapter 20 next, but for now, see you next time.